Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Shamika Michelle, along with my co-hosts Charles Love and Dr. Wilfred Riley. Tonight's guest is the Dr. Ann Lesby, and I'll be leading this conversation to make things more comfortable for her since I'm a woman. The first question I'd like to ask Dr. Ann is why we only have your photo rather than a video?
Well, first of all, it's Lesby.
Oh, Lesby. Sorry. Who is Ann Lesby? That's a singer, right?
Ann
I'm
Lesby.
still wearing this name. You so black. You're like...
I'm black, because Lesby just did
I
not...
almost didn't even hear Ann Lesby. Yeah. You thinking about the old R&B singer, right? Lesby.
Well,
Ann
blacks are often confused for each other, so...
Yeah, sometimes. We all look alike. But yeah, why don't we have your photo? I mean, your actual face smiling at us. I'm sure you're happy and bright.
Charles, I don't owe anyone an explanation for my choice to remain off camera, but in the aftermath of the ongoing pandemic, many individuals suffer from fear of unmasked faces, or FUF, as we call it. So in order to avoid triggering those folks, we can either wear a mask on Zoom or we can remain off camera. I'm choosing to do both.
Okay, Ann, can you tell us about your background?
I prefer not to share about my background, as I do not feel safe sharing personal details with a bigoted audience. I do have one story, if you'd like, that I can share from my childhood, which may put into perspective where I am now in life.
Great, please.
When I was in second grade, our teacher assigned a project in which we were asked to talk about a family member or a distant relative we were proud of and explain what we admire about them and how we feel we are like them ourselves. I chose my maternal great-grandfather Amos, who was a Black freedman. I told the class I was proud to be a Black person like Grandpa Amos, and later the other children laughed and said, I'm sorry, this is difficult. I was the whitest Black person they had ever seen. I was devastated. I went to the office and I asked to speak to the principal, but he merely looked amused and said that I did, in fact, look white. I was so angry I couldn't speak. I do not remember much after that, but my mother says I remained silent and did not stop shaking for weeks. All I know is that it was at that moment that I realized my purpose in life was to educate bigots about identity.
Wow. That's a heck of a story. I know there's so much there, but it's funny. I used to manage restaurants for years, and I get into these high-end restaurants, and they had never had Black managers before. And people say, "I'd like to speak to the manager," and I come over and they say, "Look, and they point at their food and they look up and they're like, shocked that it's a Black guy, right?" And I'm sure. I mean, come on, we all obviously have been told that he could pass. So I guess he probably would be able to relate to that story a little more than anyone else. But since you're speaking of identity, you describe yourself as 1/8 Black, and I'll follow you on Twitter, and you say some pretty harsh things about whites. So I want to know what your thoughts are. You say you're 1/8 Blacks on the other 7/8 of your identity.
Well, and I do agree. White passing Blacks, WP PBs are one of the most oppressed categories of people of color. But as to your question, I do not describe myself as 1/8 Black. I am 1/8 Black. I find it interesting that your assumption is that my other 7/8 is white. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, mostly I guess because I mean your second grade class also too. I mean, yeah.
Okay. This is just another example of how white centeredness rules the lowercase b Black conservative population. Furthermore, it is extremely insensitive to ask a Black person about white ancestry. I'm already feeling triggered.
Well, I mean, we definitely don't. I mean, we're not trying to make you triggered. It's just trying to get an understanding.
Well, you're doing it.
Okay, I'm just trying to get an understanding. Okay, but you also say something about lowercase b Black people. What is the lowercase b Black?
Conservatives.
Huh.
Conservative Blacks are white adjacent. When you forsake your Blackness to willingly serve the white man, you give up your uppercase b and become a lowercase b.
And the three of us are we all regular B or lower B?
I would assume lower b.
Shamika?
Uppercase b.
Shamika Shamika was singing an Ann Lesby song. I mean, now I got this mixed up an Ann Lesby song. She lowercase maybe will, but Shamika, you ever been considered a little B?
A little B?
Yeah.
Yes, a little bit.
Oh, that's the wrong B. That's a whole different B.
Shamika, are you conservative?
I am conservative, yes.
You are not Black.
Oh, Will.
Tastes like chocolate to me.
Will, yeah, turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I don't really see myself as serving anybody. I mean, there are quite a few white guys working for me, so I don't know if being, making money and living life is really failing. I think that's an interesting idea. But I actually I have some questions about some of the other things that were said here. Now, I mean, after our own grad school relationship, I mean, I've followed some of your writings, and you say you identify right now as a semi-trans lesbian who almost exclusively dates men. So semi-trans lesbian, but almost entirely about the fellas. Can you tell us what that means?
First of all, I do not appreciate you bringing the past into this. Should be a professional environment, and our previous relationship has nothing to do with this. That said, I do not owe you, Wilfred, or anyone else an explanation for my lifestyle. And I also do not appreciate being hit on without prior consent during an interview.
Well, as one very quick question, not a lot of ad-libbing here, but I mean, as a lesbian, would you date a woman?
I do not owe you an explanation for my lifestyle. Please move on.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So a lot of male dating lesbians out there. So I mean, now I guess the next question here, there's a lot of debate about gender identity right now. Some say obviously some women have 9-inch penises. Others say that gender is a woo concept on par with believing yourself to be Napoleon, Emperor of the French. Do you believe that anyone can identify as whatever they want? And I guess kind of moving forward with this, what are your thoughts on the recent mass shooter who shot up a gay bar and then came out as gender non-conforming? And Zuri is still sticking to that. So trans supporters don't seem to believe Zuri, but I thought we were supposed to. What is your take?
It's very simple. Everyone can self-identify except for bigots. If someone has shown animosity for trans people, that person can't identify as trans until they have become an anti-transphobe. This would involve publicly apologizing for past anti-trans transgressions and making a public declaration of ownership, which would include outward expressions such as prominently displayed pronouns, use of the trans flag, and so on. If you're in doubt about a trans identity, ask a trans person. We can always tell.
Okay, what about the term pregnant people? Surely we agree that only women can be pregnant, right?
Pregnant folks are people who become pregnant or can become pregnant. Women, men, non-binary, furries, bigenders, demigenders, anyone who has a uterus and is of offspring-bearing years can be a pregnant person. The term woman has nothing whatsoever to do with the capacity to become pregnant.
Okay. You mentioned furries. Can one identify as an animal? Because I once wanted to identify as a bird to fly overhead and shit on people's heads. Can animals also be racist?
If you believe yourself to be a bird, you are a bird. It is not my place to question your identity. As to animal racism, this admittedly is not a topic I've widely researched, but it is my understanding that animals can be born or hatched racist, cannot be, excuse me, but they will acquire a distrust for Black and brown people if raised in white households.
Wow. Will, what do you think about that? Do you think that an animal can? Well, I mean, I guess it makes sense, right? If you train the dog to do anything else, that's the case. But she said that it could be trained to, in a white household, to distrust Black and brown people. But could it be trained to distrust anyone? Dwarfs, ugly people, white people? I don't know. A certain color? Is it confined to just Black and brown?
Well, yeah. I mean, now I think what Anne would probably say here is that bigotry against white people isn't bigotry because it's good, but just with a lot of longer words. I mean, that's generally how that works. But yeah, I mean, in fact, of course, I think you can train a dog, for example, to be racist. A friend of mine growing up in the hood was Hispanic and actually a lot of gang tensions, and his dog didn't like white or Black people. So I mean that was a racist dog. It liked Mexicans. So I mean I would assume that you could probably know that. I think that was just an accidentally racist dog. It knew who might rob the house. But I'm sure you could train a dog. You could give it 3 colors of stuffed dummy and tell it to, attack all but the one in the middle. But I mean, I think that kind of there's a question here that ties into the whole pregnant people thing. So I mean, obviously, we just saw one of the highest dollar, highest grossing documentaries really in the past decade, and that's Matt Walsh's "What Is a Woman?" On the Daily Wire. I mean, we're pretty much all on the right on this show, center right at least. I've done some things with them, a lot of product there. But so Anne, I'm pretty sure you've seen "What Is a Woman?" What do you think if we're talking about this whole range of things? Can you identify as a woman? Can you identify as an animal? I'll also add in the "What Is a Woman?" for those who haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. There's a segment where they go beyond transgenderism and they talk to Lupa, who is a woman who believes actually a man who believes he is a woman who believes she is a wolf, but I mean practices their howling and so on. But I mean, Anne, what do you think of "What Is a Woman?" What's your take?
Oh, it made me nauseous.
Hmm?
Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh is a white supremacist, drag-phobic, anti-trans bigot. For some reason, he's obsessed with prioritizing the needs of cis women at the expense of trans women.
And
What is a
just not at all to break in there and kind of require a lot of extensive dialogue, but so a cis woman would be what some people might think of as woman classic, with the vagina, clitoris, or a reproductive system, perhaps a husband. I mean, so that's what a cis woman is. Is that correct?
Perhaps.
correct?
Okay. Just wanted to clarify the scientific nomenclature.
So you were giving us your
But
review.
yes,
Go on.
yeah,
What
but
is a
I'd love to.
woman? What is a woman is just, it's a transphobic attackumentary. The entire film is, it overflows with harmformational statistics and uncensored interviews, including an especially dangerous conversation with trans man Scott Nugent. He's notorious for discouraging parents from allowing children access to gender affirming care. Guys, this is the type of vicious conservative propaganda which threatens to undo all of the progress achieved by trans activists in the past 10 years. Honestly, I was shaking so hard after I watched the trailer, I nearly passed out. I implore your audience, avoid this film, avoid Matt Walsh, avoid Scott Nugent and Casey Miller and any other detransitioner who opposes all the work that we've done and everything that we've accomplished for trans rights.
Will, I know you probably got a follow up of that because that's a lot there. But I got to ask Shamika a question. She talked about, now I didn't see the film, so I don't know whether it does or not. I don't know what his intention is, but it's interesting because she said something about he was a bunch of labels. It was a drag phobic something thing, but then said he was prioritizing cis women. And I didn't know what that was because I think they all made it up until Will kindly defined it for us. Cis woman is what others would define. I want to tweak Will's definition. He said what others would define as a woman classic. I think it's what others would define as a woman. So since he's prioritizing women and is saying that in the aggregate is a bad thing, and you're a woman, so how do you feel? Is it really a crime for Matt to prioritize women?
Yeah, no, it's not a crime for him to prioritize women, and that's the way it should be. We only have two genders. Actually, you're either male or female, you're man or woman, and I just don't really understand all of the extraness. I watched the film, and what is a woman? It's an adult human female, and anybody that doesn't understand that is nuts.
Simply put. And Will, even, my approach is generally to give people their arguments. So let's assume there are 57 genders and they all have a place somewhere. And Shamika
64.
64 genders, it changed. And people can also identify as animals, and Shamika gets to go crap on people. But that said, I'm still not understanding why it's bad for of those 64 genders. People can go prop up whatever ones they want to. Why it's bad for Matt to just decide, well, I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to highlight the actual woman, and I just want to make a movie saying that those people are important, and maybe even talk about how it may somehow inadvertently hurt the feminist movement. Like you say, you want move women forward. You want them to have more opportunities and more growth. How can you do that where tomorrow Will can be that woman and Will can take Shamika's place?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people in both my and Shamika's lives would be kind of upset and surprised by that for a whole bunch of different reasons. But I mean, just feels very different. But I mean, like, just at any rate, but all
Shamika's
jokes
passing. Oh, that's a whole
yeah, all jokes and banter aside, this is actually, I think, a pretty important point, though. Even if you accept gender as real, kind of breaking the fourth wall for a second, it doesn't change the reality of sex. So the idea of gender is just that we should take the level of sex stereotype that people prefer very seriously. So if you if you're a girl and you like to play with GI Joes, we should recognize that and treat you as beyond a tomboy, as a boy. Now, actually, to the extent I'm feminist at all, I'm kind of second wave, and I think that's complete BS. I think you can be a tough girl. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. You can be a female athlete. It's only happened once or twice in my life, but I've lost basketball games to women. I mean, there are women in the WNBA. I mean, there are.
Hopefully, it was two women who are in the WNBA.
They played in college, but I mean, there are college women's basketball teams full of top women's players that could beat most high school varsity guys. I mean, it's there are great women athletes.
High school varsity at the time when you lost?
At that time, no, I was like 26.
Ooh.
Yeah, but I mean, like you get worse as you get older. It's not like you play more basketball. You're just sitting around on a sales floor. But the whole point of all this,
come on here to explain my record.
No, my record would be like 108-2. I mean, so but the whole point. No, but that's versus women. I mean, like versus dudes, that's like 1,000, 1,000. I don't know. But like the whole point of this, though, the point of this, though, is that if you're a woman and you play basketball for North Carolina, that doesn't make you a dude. It doesn't make your boyfriend gay. I mean, so even if you recognize the reality of gender and you say, okay, we should take these sex stereotypes seriously. We should buy our daughter these male toys she wants. And again, we're all saying, if you're going to accept that at all, and traditionalists have a lot of problems with that, but that still doesn't, so that's level one. That still doesn't make you a boy, level two. But level three, even if all that's real, it doesn't change sex itself in any way. So when we get into the serious discussions about like prison, none of this matters. So you have people saying, well, I've adopted this set of norms and stereotypes. I am a woman. Therefore, although I have an 8-inch penis, I should go to the women's jail. That strikes almost everyone outside of academia as nonsensical. But anyhow, that's gender as versus sex. So technically speaking, the good Dr. Lesby is correct. Like you could have an infinite number of genders because there are an infinite number of personalities. There are an infinite number of ways you can be masculine. Like I'm actually really masculine, but I'm also at this point in my life kind of short and fat, and I like to cook. So am I really high over here, really low over here? Well, that could be my gender rating. That does nothing to do with my sex.
Why does it have to have a name?
Well, I can answer that if you want. Like, actually, I'm a pretty good college professor. I mean, it's Judith Butler in the 1980s started trying to really come up with a science of feminism and what she called queerness. Mm-hmm. And I mean, she would write essays, and excuse the language because we have two ladies on the panel, but they would have titles like "Why I Like Eating Pussy." But I mean, she would try to
ask, was she gay?
Well, she wouldn't say that she was.
Eating pussy, you're gay. Or yes, I mean, you're a dude or you're gay, a gay woman.
I agree. I think if so, like to me, a lot of this and that the title is something much more complicated and sophisticated. But I mean, to me, yes, that's correct. If you're a man and you like to have sex with men, you're a homosexual. Like none of this is especially difficult. But there are entire fields, women's studies, queer theory, that are based around kind of exploring and questioning these things. And then really get into asking a lot of these very creepy questions, like why do we have an age of consent? Because if you're a 40-year-old businessman, it's creepy as hell to be sniffing around high school girls. Get out of here, buddy. I mean, so I think that there's a revealed wisdom that most people know. And there's a tendency, Christianity and Islam are pretty good at talking about this, by the way. There's a tendency of people who have, the 33 degrees of wisdom, who are fairly intelligent in a worldly sense, to criticize things that have developed over thousands of years because the belief is I'm more intelligent than this, more knowledgeable than this. I don't need this. I myself am going to take this down. And in a lot of these academic fields, you see a lot of this. So like the whole idea that there's no sex because there are people who unfortunately have these genetic conditions like mosaicism, many of which are terrible to live with, by the way, but they have sexual characteristics of both. So sex doesn't exist. And the response, if you're debating a quote unquote TRA, a trans rights activist, I'm going to say this and shut up, but it would be, do you have this condition? Like if you're talking to someone who's 6'4" Caucasian male who's like, well, I'm about trans rights and you're foolish if you think sex is a binary. The response would be bluntly, well, it's a binary for you, isn't it? I mean, do you have a penis? Do you have small gay meats or whatever? Do you have an XY chromosome? There may be a few people out there that don't, but you're not one of them, are you, sir?
Right. So I mean, we got to move on to other things. Will, I mean, anybody any last questions or comments on the gender thing? I know she said a lot.
Yeah, coming up when I was growing up, gender matched sex. So this whole new idea that it doesn't is new for me.
Right. I mean, if nothing else, I know one thing that was interesting in all that is that, and you said something about there was a guy in the documentary. Again, I didn't see it. That was really off-putting to you because he had detransitioned or something. What is your take on that? It seems like we're hearing more and more about people. We're going to have someone on soon who detransitioned. I met someone the other day. But what is your take on that, and how does that kind of turn the transgender movement on its head?
Detrans is a mental disorder, and we should treat it as such.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that trans is a mental disorder?
That is disgusting. Of course not.
Oh, I was just asking. I mean, so one is and one is not. So trans is not but detrans is a mental disorder.
Detrans is delusion.
So what should they do then? They should just
continue.
Not. So they feel that. So I'm a woman who felt like a man, and I transitioned, and you think that's fine. Then I thought about it. I'm like, no, I don't feel like a man. I feel like a woman, and then that's a bad thing. They're still just doing what they feel. What should they do then? Should they just
the only reason anyone would question their trans identity is if societal pressures push them in that direction.
So what
just
do we do?
Be kind to them.
Oh, okay.
Be kind, but be firm. Mm-hmm. Don't feed their illusions. Continue to use their trans name and their trans pronouns and hope that they come around.
Don't feed their illusions. So wow, that is a lot to take. I'm watching Shamika as she's added it up, and she's like, it's like watching Nash and A Beautiful Mind, right? That math equations, just like you see the smoke and the thought process going. But when you figure it out, Shamika, let me know. But I want to move on a bit from gender and that kind of thing. We talked about race a bit. You have another shockingly interesting. You have a lot of interesting beliefs, but you have one interesting thing that I want to talk about first. It is your idea for flabbulous. See, I got to get used to it once I start seeing the sign. Fitness. Tell us what flabbulous fitness is all about.
Fabulous Fitness is a chain I started it's an alternative fitness. These centers focus on fat positivity and body equity. So, contrary to popular belief, fatness is not unhealthiness. Some fat folks are healthier than some thin-bodied individuals. You know what that tells me? Weight is entirely disconnected from physical health, and anyone who states otherwise is operating under systemic weightism. It's also important to remember that emotional and mental health contribute to physical health. So it's better that a person eat high-calorie foods they enjoy than to feel bad about themselves while eating healthy, quote-unquote, foods. So I encourage my clients, among other things, to remove all nutritional information, aside from ingredients, from food packages, as well as remove tags from clothing and anything else that might cause fat negative thinking.
Shamika, as she was responding, I was watching you. But before you get into that thing, will you be the first in line to get a membership here?
Me?
I love it because if you don't know, Ann, Shamika has an aversion to fat people. So Shamika,
really,
yeah, you go back and watch some episodes, and the topic can be anything. We could be talking about crime, and she's like, "What about the fat people?" And you'd be proud of me. I'd had to have taken Shamika to task on her views on the fat. and you would be proud of me. You're like, look at that. I'm a champion of the fat only because Shamika is so over the top. So Shamika, tell me what you think about this wonderful concept.
I don't think it's wonderful. I do think that I agree with a couple of things, like the effect that mental health can have on the body.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that there are some fat people that are healthier than skinny people, especially like those that may be suffering from anorexia or
Heroin
cancer.
addict.
Or you said what?
I said heroin addict.
Right. Crackheads. But overall, we know that this is not the case. And overall, we know that heart disease is an issue here in the country, diabetes, high blood pressure, stress on your knees and your ankles, just carrying all that weight around. So I think that a program to celebrate fat people would not be the right thing to do. And I tried to say that with all, respect.
You didn't even sound that bad this time.
Failed to push away from the table and put the fork down. I think being fat is a choice and not a very healthy one.
Well, what do you say to the piece about the removing the tags? That part was pretty interesting to me. I get the concept, but I mean, if I'm, a 5'4" woman, I'm a, $1.99. Cutting the tags is not gonna. I mean, I still have to buy the thing first, so I know the size of it when I buy it. And then when everybody looks at me and they keep saying, "Hey, Lizzo," and I'm like, and I have to double say, "All right, Lizzo," won't I know, regardless of the tag size?
Yeah,
not to mention most clothes are tagless now anyway, so you can't really cut it off.
I mean, I think a lot of fat people don't pay attention to the tags anyway. I mean, when you see them in these clothes looking like they were poured in or looking like melted butter, we understand that they aren't paying attention to the tags as it is. They're buying medium, small stuff they wish they were. Yeah, I don't think
maybe it's a motivational move.
I think it's delusion.
Like the detransitioners. And again, creative and interesting ideas. You have another great idea. And tell us about this idea and this concept of dating bigots.
Well, I cannot reveal too much as we are still in the development stages, but here's what I can tell you. It's called Date to Educate.
Nice.
It's going to be a quarterly 6-week course dedicated to equipping brave young women to use their dating lives to bring the message of anti-bigotry to unreached white cishet males.
So they're going to educate them by dating them, and then so they're going to date. They're not bigots. They're going to date these bigots, and they're going to teach them in the ways and kind of move them. It sounds like a brilliant idea, but
it sounds like the women that don't shower, that's not going to get very far with these men.
But that's an interesting point. So we can talk about that. But here's the flip side to it. What if they do it, they pull it off, and they attract these people? I don't know where they find them, but they find them or whatever. And these women, because these men are cis and straight and white and successful or whatever, these are alpha men, and the women fall for them. What happens then, Ann?
That does not happen, let me assure you. It's laughable to even imagine that a woke individual could fall for a bigot.
Well,
honestly, in my experience, it's all I can do to hold back my nausea when a white man attempts to charm me.
But how do you find them?
They're everywhere. Our entire society uplifts white cishet men. They are the most predatory. They will hit on you without prior consent on the subway, walking down the street, in your own home. I had one white man who walked right into my home and asked me on a date.
Did you go on the date?
I did.
Oh, to educate
I
them,
did.
obviously, right? That's probably where you got the idea. I didn't even think about that. You called me up that time, but but they're everywhere. But they can't all be bigots, though, right?
White people are bigots by default.
Oh,
Is this movement tied into similar movements like high body count for justice and so on that we're seeing on the campus?
see, we're not on the campus. Well, what is high
I was
body
gonna say,
count for
what is that?
justice? Shamika and I looking at you like, what?
I was
I'm assuming it
actually,
doesn't mean murder, so I'm assuming you mean, but who's
Sex.
well,
doing
yes,
it? But
yes,
who's
of
doing it?
course. The goal of high body count for justice, an entirely serious movement, of course, is to bring incels into the left wing fold by offering them an alternative.
Oh, incels. There we go.
Okay. Wow. That's a real thing.
Wow. What do you think happens, Shamika, if Anne's able to get an army of women to go out and date these men and tell, I don't know, take them to go see Eat, Pray, Love, and give them avocado toast for lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and cry with them and do all the things they need to kind of move them away from the incels and all these right wingers. Will it be successful?
I think there'll be a line drawn in the sand, and we'll get to see who the real men are and who's been pretending. Because they may end up being bitches, being vegan, avocado toast eating, scarf around the neck, little small tight pants, noodle armed bitches.
If a man wants to identify as a bitch, he can do that. He can be that creature. That is one of the 64 genders.
Yeah,
Bitch.
apparently, because I see.
Well, actually, I mean, like, offensive language aside, it kind of is. It's like NB-fem or something. It's like men who refuse violence and still identify as men but are feminine in every other way. Like, there's a full list of, if you ever Google list of the Tumblr genders, there are actually people who are grad students in like women's studies, I believe, who have written out all the possible genders. It's like auti gender, which is a gender shaped by your autism. I mean, it's interesting stuff, So,
Interesting is one way to put it. Will, anything you want to ask?
well, we've got a couple, a few more questions that I think we talked about with Anne beforehand. So, I mean, one of them, of course, gets into the question of the book. So, I mean, I guess the question would just be, tell us about, so, I mean, obviously, Dr. Ibram Kendi wrote, a heartrending work of staggering genius called Antiracist Baby. And you're topping him with the book Antiracist Fetus. Now, can you tell us about Antiracist Fetus?
Of course. Absolutely, by Antiracist Baby. It changed my entire life. My children, every night, they are 4 and 7 and 13. And I only wished that there had been something when I was pregnant to start earlier and read to the fetus as it was turning into a human being, which of course it wasn't yet. But what most people misunderstand is that a fetus is like a sponge. It absorbs all of the tolerant and intolerant energies in its environment, i.e., the pregnant environment. Pregnant people can use specific strategies to minimize the harm that occurs to this fetus while in utero, such as atmosphere containing racist and white-centered books and entertainment. They should cut ties with bigoted family members and practice anti-racist meditations, increasing with each trimester. I go into greater detail, of course, in my book, available now wherever prenatal fetal anti-bigotry books are found. But I would just say that just because a fetus is not a human being, this does not mean.
Oh, I think we lost you. Hello?
Aborted.
Just because a fetus is not a human being, this does not mean that it cannot be a bigot.
That could be a bumper sticker statement. And again, I've never seen, kudos to you, I've never seen a guest make Shamika think so much. But I got to ask you a question about the last piece there, Shamika. She said that she did a little pitch for a book. She's not all gone. She's got a little capitalism in her. And she said, pick up the book wherever prenatal, fetal, anti-bigotry books are sold. How many stores you got around your parts where you can buy? Where they got a section of the prenatal anti-bigotry books?
Zero.
Oh,
Zero in the bookstores.
well, we're gonna have to get Ann to send you a copy. You normally pitch. We got a guest got a book. It's like I want a signed copy. You're gonna ask Ann for a signed copy of Antiracist Fetus?
Am I? Well, hell yeah. I mean, I definitely look forward to reading Anti-Racist Fetus. I first got to read Anti-Racist Baby at an anti-CRT conference, and I was shocked by the brilliance of some of the passages.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Here we be, you and me. Baby makes us three. I mean, it's interesting stuff, and if you can get $1 million contract, I would probably write it too.
You'd probably write it too. Yeah.
There are a lot of deep questions actually. Like, does Dr. Lesby think that abortion is more appropriate for fetuses that are racist? I mean, these are things for maybe a second interview.
Right.
Like, I mean, if the
Ooh.
implicit assumptions test in the womb shows that the baby
Right.
moves away from like a black light more, I mean, this is interesting
question.
stuff.
That's a great question.
Yeah, you should. Hopefully, you'll do that research. Hopefully, you'll do that research and come back and tell us that. I only got a couple more questions here at the end. The kind of topic we talked about race, we talked about gender. It's January. We just made it past the big holidays where people are shopping and in positive spirits and giving thanks and celebrating religious or not, celebrating the birth of Christ or celebrating Santa Claus, but everybody's happy. But it's also an awkward time where people who tend on the left they're afraid to say the holidays, and they're like, "Well, happy holidays, or how you doing?" And I know that must have been a difficult time for you. So I want to know: do you celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas?
I do not celebrate Thanksgiving. I protest Thanksgiving. To celebrate Thanksgiving would be an act of violence toward Indigenous folks, to whom, according to a DNA test that I took in college, I am related. It's a day on which bigots and colonizers celebrate slaughter and genocide. So on Thanksgiving, I shut off the electricity in my home for 4 hours and I abstain from eating. I light candles. I listen to music recorded and sold by Native Americans while I recite sorry, this is very difficult. I recite Indigenous poetry I wrote in college after I discovered my Native American heritage.
I'll let you gather yourself. So I gotta ask you. There may be some of the biggest she talked about that have some nefarious views, but I always thought of Thanksgiving as just a positive thing. You give thanks for whatever you got, right? You thank whoever you want for whatever you got, right? Thank your parents, thank God, thank non-God, thank Mother Nature, thank whatever. Just a day to be like real, take reflection and think about what you have. And as a Black man in America, I mean, you tell me your views, Shamika. I've never sat down at the table, family around, all the spread. You got my chitlins on the plate, and then go to cut in and say, "Man, sure do miss that genocide." Right? I mean, nobody's think. I mean, do you know anybody who's really thinking about that? I mean, and it's odd because this is the problem we talk about all the time, where things are wherever there are bad things, we are making things worse because we're highlighting stuff that nobody was ever bothered about. Think about it. We're old enough, you always call me old, but we're old enough to remember when Thanksgiving would come, people would be happy they're out of school. coming home from college to hang out with the family, eat a really good home cooked meal because we've been eating cafeteria food. And then where's the party, right? College age is like, where's the party? Remember, you come home and it's like party. All the people from different high schools and different colleges come back and we all party again together. And that was it. So it was all this fun fellowship thing. Nobody was ever talking about, man, those poor indigenous people ever. So now we're doing that, right? So where it's positive maybe to understand more history and you use that stuff, that could be a good thing. But overall, it's a net loss, a loss of positivity, a loss of fellowship, a loss of people. The whole point of giving thanks, is to be happy and upbeat. And now you keep reminding us, people died, blankets, right? It's just shocking to me. It's like we're going backwards. What do you think, Shamika?
I agree with you, but I will say, in listening to Dr. Ann speak,
I keep forgetting to say that. Mm-hmm.
She may be 1/8% Black, because I have started to hear more Black people say, why would I celebrate Thanksgiving? Because, the land is stolen and they were killed and blah, 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 blah. And you're right. Growing up, I didn't hear that. We were grateful to be able to gather with family and have a good time. Everybody's off work. We get to eat. We get to see each other when we maybe haven't seen each other since the last Thanksgiving. So I do think it is not going forward. It is definitely going backwards and living in the past. This new thinking of, I can't celebrate it because it's genocide.
And Will,
one thing I think a lot of.
Oh, go ahead.
What's going on?
No, I was
what were you going to ask, bro?
I was just going to say, but what are we thanking people for? It's like, it's insane. In her example, where she's like, well, I got some Black friends. It's like, why would I celebrate it? Because this negative stuff happened. But that's not why you celebrated it. Just give thanks for whatever you thankful.
I think that's actually a very important point that I'd say two things. I'd rat on your point for a second. But first, one thing I don't think a lot of my woke Black and Asian buddies understand is that you're not from here either. So like during the old wars, like you might have been the sergeant and the white guy might have been the colonel. Like there was some racism in the military, but like, the percentage of young Black men that were Buffalo soldiers was real high. Like, I mean, the idea that if we gave the land back to the Indians, Blacks or Koreans or something would get to stay. I mean, no, like, who do you think built those railroads across the country? If you want to talk about actual minority accomplishments, you think we were unarmed while this was happening? I mean, like, the Indians allowed it? I mean, so I think there's a real lack of understanding of real history where people make up these pretty categories like, oh, you had the women and the minorities versus the whites. Well, there was no women in the minorities, Blacks, Italians. We didn't no one let women vote till 1920.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Like
70 years after the former enslaved men.
Yeah, the Black men, Irish men, Jewish men, all the men got the right to vote in 1865. I mean, so none of these categories existed historically. They were invented in the 1960s by communists. So that's important to keep in mind. That's just a fact. Okay, but the second thing that you're saying, the idea of what was it? You're talking about
what are they giving thanks for? They're saying they can't celebrate it because why would I give thanks for XYZ when this happened to this Native American person, when this happened to this white person? But that's not why you're giving thanks today in 2020.
Oh yeah, so this is another point. I made this point about Martin Luther King Day, actually against kind of a white racist. Like I was talking about Martin Luther King, and someone was joking around on Twitter, and they were like, oh, this guy wasn't white or racist, really. But it was like my Spanish sparring partner was like, oh, you're all about Martin Luther King. Oh, we'll name all his mistresses then. People were just making fun of Martin Luther King Day. And the jokes were funny. But it was like, okay, when we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, we're not celebrating the fact that he slept with a lot of women. We're not celebrating the fact he was homophobic. We're celebrating the fact he got Blacks and whites to stop fighting and he passed the Civil Rights Act. That's almost the only thing people like about the dude, but it's really, really impressive. Like when people celebrate George Washington, we're not celebrating the fact that he had a bunch of slaves. We're celebrating the fact that he's the father of the country. So when you celebrate something, you're celebrating the thing that everyone agrees on about that person or that date. So like Thanksgiving doesn't have anything to do with like the fact that whites and Indians fought one another. Like we know, go to a powwow, they'll tell you. Thanksgiving is the day that they stopped. Like it was a week-long feast that interrupted a major war, if you want to get wonky. Like Chief Powhatan himself brought a deer and they all sat down. That's the point, that you can make peace with your enemies and eat with your family. So, I mean, I tend to agree that focusing on the fact that the war started again eventually is just intentionally throwing dirt on the fire. There's no reason for that.
Right. And we gave you a moment to compose yourself. You were going to talk about Christmas as well.
Yes, I do celebrate Christmas, but I do so in a way that is educational to my children. For example, we keep our decorations out of view from any windows so that neighbors or people passing by will not be offended if they do not celebrate the holiday. We also have one tradition which I am so proud. We will watch all of the Christmas films.
Oh, that's great.
And we will find the white supremacist, cis heteronormative, and other bigoted themes in each one. And I have to say, my 7-year-old has become quite good at it.
Man, you just took something I was thinking was really positive, what you're going to say, and made it a whole lot less positive. Will, you got anything else? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Anything to ask as a final question to the good Dr. Lesby? Let's see. So we've talked about holidays. Okay, now, so there's one final question I think Shamika might ask here, but okay. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously I know you personally, so on, but we've all seen your Twitter feed and it's a little extreme. I mean, I'm a semi-trans demisexual lesbian who dates, although shout to the demisexuals. I see a lot of feminists taking that path after 10 or 15 years in the club scene. But I mean, you're a semi-trans demisexual lesbian who only dates men. It's a little extreme. What do you say to the people who believe that this is all parody? You're making fun of hyper-sexed feminists with useless degrees who went to Colby and Bowdoin and Oberlin, and you're just laughing at this entire chunk of society working in DEI offices, and you're secretly a trad wife somewhere in a happy marriage. How would you respond to that?
There is so much here that I find incredibly offensive, but I will say that
Tough question.
as to the idea that I am a parody or satire account, humor is a tool of bigots. And what I find is that those who accuse me of satire or parody are clearly in denial about their own internalized bigotry. They cannot understand my truth because they don't understand anything. So in some cases, I allow the illusion to continue because it gives me access to bigoted audiences. And it pains me deeply to see my articles published under humor or satire. But I am willing to make this compromise if it makes my truth available to unreached audiences, such as your own.
Dr. Ann, while we've been on this interview, my daughter has texted our family group chat to say, oh my God, you should hear the woman they're interviewing tonight. This bitch is delusional. So I guess my question to you would be, are you happy?
Am I happy?
Yes.
Well, Shamika, considering my multi-intersectionally oppressed position in life, I am surprisingly happy. I always look for opportunities to find joy in the world despite the difficulties I face as a semi-trans, demisexual, 1/8 Black, neurodivergent lesbian who dates men. And I face these difficulties every minute of every day.
Charles, it's on you.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't think there's a final point you can put on that. I mean, I didn't think about that. That is a great question because, I mean, your daughter's crazy like you. I wouldn't have put it that way, but it is interesting. A lot of the stuff, the replies were so heavy and negative, and there was so much darkness. That was an interesting question. But I guess we end on a positive note that we may not agree on all this. Will and Anne may not get together again.
Thank God.
But at least she's happy because a lot of people wouldn't think that's the case. She is Dr. Anne Lesby. Anne, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
To say, God bless the US of A, land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.